So season 4 of Castlevania just came out, and I have to admit, I was pretty excited to watch it. The first 3 seasons of the show were awesome. The writing was really good, the voice acting was even better, action scenes were well animated, and it was fairly faithful to the source material without overstaying its welcome with the fan service. All in all, it was a pretty great show that seemed to be gearing up for an epic final season. And then I watched it. I gotta say, guys, this final season is really, really lazy. Almost all of the elements of this final season feel like the showrunners gave up before production even started and were doing the bare minimum required to crap out a final season. The writing really takes a dive. Almost all of the character setup from the previous seasons is ignored, and things get real convenient real quick towards the end. But before I get into the last season, I wanted to do a quick take on the seasons that came before it. Season 1 was pretty short with only 6 episodes and doesn't do too much beyond setting up the characters and the story. I don't think Netflix was all that confident that the show would do well, and so they ordered a small season, and the promotion for the show was pretty minimal. But it turns out there was quite a lot of people who liked the show, and so they gave the go-ahead for Season 2. And oh boy, was Season 2 crazy. Season 3 takes a step back a bit from the non-stop action, and it takes its time to establish a much larger world. And while the main characters admittedly take a back seat for the most part, we get some really great scenes from the side characters.
May I ask a question of you? Of course. Do you remember who you were before you went to hell? I almost do.
We start to see factions form, alliances made, characters grow or get beaten down. Really interesting stuff that was setting up for what was supposed to be a pretty compelling final season. Then Season 4 comes along and, well, let's just get into it. In Season 4, we see Trevor and Sypha are doing literally the exact same thing they were doing in the last season. They're going from town to town, killing monsters and vampire wizards and God knows what else. Only now they have to stop people from bringing Dracula back from the dead. Now, this premise could have been pretty cool if the main characters actually cared about what they were doing, but in the entire first episode, they just look bored, and the action scenes don't even feel like they matter. Like, we know they're not gonna kill the main characters in the first episode. There isn't any real danger or stakes here. They eventually make their way to the city where Dracula's wife was murdered, and they run into this weirdo. Now, here is where I started to realize that this season was going to be a mess, and it's because of how they wrote the dialogue around this character.
I went insane the day Dracula hit the city. I saw his face in the sky. It was like the devil himself punched the world.
It's lazy, weird, and it doesn't seem like anyone tried to write anything good. Weirdly, this just feels like bad video game dialogue. Now, I'm not overly familiar with the games, but did the writers just copy and paste from the games? Now, initially, I thought they were going to use the instances of Trevor and Sypha thwarting people's attempts to bring back Dracula later on in the show, discovering that it was actually Saint Germain who orchestrated them behind the scenes, tying up all these loose threads together. But no, they're just crazy people, I guess. The next person I want to talk about is Alucard. See, in the last season, we see some really cool character moments from him where he tries to help these 2 wannabe vampire hunters get stronger, only they betray him and he ends up having to kill them to save his own life. At the very end of the season, it hints that he's about to make a dark turn into madness brought on by his own isolation, hinting that he might turn into another version of his father.
But this seemed to work well enough. For dead old dad.
So what do they do in Season 4? Well, they drop all that pesky character development and just have him kill monsters instead. Yeah, no, this is so much better. Oh, and they kind of hint that he gets a sassy girlfriend at the end of the season, which feels really forced and unnecessary. Alucard is an androgynous bisexual demi-human. He doesn't need a naggy girlfriend to round out his character. Now let's talk about the plot, because wow, was this a mess. So at the end of Season 3, Saint Germain throws himself into something called the Infinite Corridor. a kind of endless hallway that can lead to just about anywhere in space and time. He does this because he's looking for a mystery woman that he apparently loves and lost some time ago. The whole thing is admittedly the weakest part of the season, but at least it had some pretty good mystery elements and set up a lot for season 4. But like with everything else in this season, its payoffs are barely coherent. We see that Saint Germain meets this weird tattoo woman and tells him that the only way that he's ever going to see the woman he loves again is to control the infinite corridor, and the only way he can do that is by creating something called a rebus, a half vampire, half human, half male, half female creature. And the only way to make one of these is to bring back Dracula and his wife and then fuse their souls together into the same Frankenstein body? This is so unnecessarily complicated. The reason he agrees to do this, by the way, is for a woman who, throughout the entirety of the show, doesn't get a name, a motivation, or even a single piece of dialogue. She is quite literally a prop for Saint Germain to win. Now, I thought that we were actually going to get some kind of backstory on her in season 4, considering how big of a mystery she was in the last season. But even in her own flashback, she just sits there and smiles at him. Oh, and she kind of breaks this dude's hand for trying to grope her, I guess. So Saint Germain agrees to make this monster, and he gets a cool little key that's powered by the souls of the dead. Ooh. We then see that the Coven of Lady Vampires have already started their plan to annex certain parts of the country to create one long pen of humans to use as livestock, and it's here we get one of the weirdest sequences of the show. It starts off with these two having a conversation about logistics and how their plan is unsustainable. And I'll admit, it's a pretty compelling scene. We see that these characters aren't mindless followers of their leader Carmilla, and they start to have doubts. Then an arrow flies in and we get a somewhat decent scene where one of the vampires starts using day armor to defend her camp, which would be cool if the people she were fighting weren't made of paper. Seriously, this fight is so one-sided, it's almost embarrassing. And after she's done laying waste to the local farmhands, she and her partner just pick up where the conversation ended, and they eventually decide to go home. Now, at first I thought they were going to have a storyline where all of the other vampires were going to turn on Carmilla, which would have been an interesting story, and they even hint that they were going in this direction with this scene with Hector and Lenore talking.
She promised me. That was her plan. And then she was left alone, and then I made her angry, and she showed me her maps. I think she lied to me.
But no, the storyline is just immediately dropped when Isaac invades. Seriously, the very second these two return home, they see that Carmilla has been killed and they just leave. Like, they don't even feel bad their leader was murdered. Like, why were you even here? Speaking of Isaac, why did he invade during the night? He has an army of night creatures that are impervious to sunlight. This is a small nitpick, but it just seems dumb to invade a vampire stronghold at night when your army can survive during the day. Just saying. The last thing I want to talk about is the dumbest aspect of this season, which is the character of Death. Now, I know that in one of the games, Death is the final boss, but here he kind of comes out of nowhere, and his plan is very stupid. He spends most of the season pretending to be this Cockney London vampire called Varney, and seems to be pretty inept at his job. He even lets this Russian vampire insult him to his face.
You're a joke. You're a shallow criminal who somehow wormed your way into Dracula's circle 100 years ago. And then he sent you all the way out here to the city he'd already burned. How useful did he really think you are?
Then towards the end of the show, when he reveals his true self, he still has that stupid accent.
You're death. Death itself?
My treasure, you gulping little shit.
Like, he's the least intimidating Death I've ever seen. Then, when all of these elements come together for the climax, some of the most convenient bullshit occurs. So a few episodes ago, Trevor discovered this super useful weapon that's like 4 blades on a ring in a pile of gold under the city where Dracula's wife was killed. And alright, I guess this kind of makes sense. They were hoarding all kinds of stuff. It's not unreasonable for him to find something like that. Characters have to level up between seasons, I get it. But then Trevor just keeps finding the most valuable weapons in the world just lying around. Weapons, I might add, that are strong enough to kill death. You see what I mean when I say this season is lazy? Like, we don't even get a backstory as to what this knife or jewel is or where it came from. So anyway, Trevor ends up sacrificing himself to kill death. 2 weeks after that, Sypha, who's pretty bummed that her boy toy got blowed up, decides to go back to her people, and surprise, surprise, she's pregnant! And not 2 seconds later, we see that Trevor actually survived killing death, thanks to Saint Germain's super special key. Happy endings for all. Oh yeah, and like Dracula and his wife are alive again, I guess, but no one cares. And I mean literally no one. They go into this inn and he pretends not to be Dracula, and the innkeeper doesn't say anything, but like, come on, man, you can't hide that face. There are a lot more things I wish I could say about this show, but if I did, we'd be here all day. So basically, if you're a fan of the show, I'd suggest watching it, if only to find out how the thing ends. Just don't get your hopes up. It's lazy, contrived, and simply not as good as the other seasons. And that's my opinion on Castlevania Season 4. Let me know down in the comments if there's another movie or TV show you want me to do a quick flyover on. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, it really helps out the channel. And I'll see you in clear skies in the future. Thanks for watching.